On a team like the Suicide Squad, surrounded by the most dastardly of the dastardly with no choice but to follow orders and try and survive, it's no surprise that the team members would develop feelings for each other, right? Killer Croc and Enchantress were one of the oddest pairings that could have happened, but you bet your socks that it did happen. The romance between Killer Croc and Enchantress was building up in the Suicide Squad for quite some time, but when the two were stuck in Belle Reve Hospital, they finally gave in to their desires. Enchantress was a powerful sorceress with the ability to wield magic like teleportation and hypnosis, and Killer Croc was a big, strong, but they were both actually pretty decent people under their scary exteriors, and they bonded over their striking similarities in their personalities, which is cute, I guess. Now, listen, to be honest, with these two being among some of the bigger names in the Doom Patrol's rogues gallery, it is probably safe to assume that fans know about this couple, but the Doom Patrol still isn't the biggest team around, and therefore, a lot of people may not even have a clue who Monsieur Mallah and the Brain actually are. Monsieur Mallah is basically a militant, super intelligent French gorilla. The Brain, on the other hand, is a genius French scientist and master criminal who exists as a disembodied brain, hence the name. So those two descriptions are pretty interesting enough on their own, but when I tell you that the French militant gorilla and the disembodied brain are an item, I think that just kind of elevates the whole thing to a different level. Together, they are the primary leaders of the Brotherhood of Evil, who were villains to both the Doom Patrol and the Teen Titans. They both first appeared in Doom Patrol 86 in 1964. Brain was once a scientist who experimented on the gorilla who would become Mallah, which increased Mallah's intelligence. An accident then injured said scientist, and Mallah had to remove his brain and place it in a technological holding thingy to keep him alive and able to communicate. The two are almost always together, with Mallah usually carrying around the brain, but hey, I don't judge. You find love where you find love, man. Happens. Okay, we are going way back in time with this next one. Sportsmaster and Tigress are not names that may immediately jump out to you, but back in the day, these two made a habit of fighting heroes like the JSA. Sportsmaster was a guy named, and I'm not joking, this is his actual name, Crusher Croc, which is hilarious, who was a disgraced athlete that used his skills to turn to a life of crime. Luckily, while he sounds utterly ridiculous, Tigress was actually Paula Brooks, originally a skilled hunter named Huntress before she became Tigress. These two completely regular people who turned to a life of crime found love with each other and had a child named Artemis, who eventually took on the Tigress title. But I just want it to be known that these two normies were able to take on people like the original Green Lantern, which is pretty impressive, if you ask me. Now, Deathstroke and Talia al Ghul have had a few passionate flings over the years. It was one of their past flings that cast a brief moment of doubt on Damian Wayne's true parentage, though Batman ultimately figured out that he was the daddy. Deathstroke is a highly trained mercenary with enhanced reflexes that make him one of the deadliest characters in the DC universe. Talia al Ghul, on the other hand, is the daughter of Ra's al Ghul, which earned her a place as the leader of the League of Assassins. Their relationship ended pretty violently in the Shadow War event when Talia ended the life of Deathstroke, though he did return due to the Lazarus Pits. Now, the villains known as Clock King and Disruptor had a pretty bad relationship from the get-go. Clock King had given Angelica Smith the suit that gave her her powers as Disruptor, after saving her from an absolutely horrible living situation in a group home. To Disruptor, Clock King became pretty much her entire world. Disruptor would join up with the Clock King's Terror Titans opposing the Teen Titans, but unfortunately for her, Clock King is a villain and not a very nice person. While she was hardcore in love with him, he used her in his evil plans with little concern for her own safety, with Clock King often preying on Disruptor's irrational hatred of other females. Their problematic and somewhat tragic relationship didn't last too long, as Clock King eventually used the Disruptor suit to ultimately take the life of Angelica. Very sad. Moving on, mostly everyone knows that comic book Thanos is completely head over heels obsessed with the personification of death in the Marvel Universe, known as Lady Death. Well, this lady actually rejects the Mad Titan, like, a lot. She pretty much made Thanos into who he is, but she also spurned his advances at almost every single turn. So naturally, eventually Thanos would get really butthurt over this, and he decides to find love somewhere else. Thanos would end up shacking up with one of the most powerful beings in Marvel Comics, the Asgardian goddess of death and ruler of hell, Hela. Now this duo actually became an incredibly menacing couple, and she didn't turn him down like Mistress Death did. But this kind of feels like when you see an ex has just started dating someone who looks just like you. Like, Thanos couldn't get Mistress Death, so he got the Asgardian version instead, which yikes. But moving on from that, the Spider-Man villain, Dr. Octopus, is not the most attractive villain out there, let's be honest. He's not what one would call, how you say, handsome. He is not in great physical shape, and he's kind of a massive jerk from time to time. But somehow, he has earned the love of quite a few people over time, including Aunt May and a woman named Angelina Bronkale, a video store clerk who fell hard for Octavius, which is weird. Harnessing virtual reality technology created by Doc Ock that allowed her to inhabit a hard light holographic body, Angelina became the villain Stunner. She was physically very intimidating, and she had strength to back it up when it came to fighting Spider-Man. She was also way out of Doc Ock's league. Unfortunately, their relationship came to an end thanks to Otto biting the dust and then being reborn. But from one creepy, unattractive scientist to another one, the twisted scientist known as Dr. Moon isn't a particularly household name, but he was mainly known for hiring out his services to other villains over the years. Everything seemed to change for Dr. Moon though after he fell in love with Angela Hawkins. Angela here is better known as the villain Phobia, a powerful psychic who can psionically project others' greatest fears. She was also a former member of the Brotherhood of Evil. Her specific powers appealed to Dr. Moon and his sick and twisted ways, and together they would frequently visit DC's secret society aboard a hidden satellite. Together, they would manipulate other villains into volunteering to join their dark experiments. Those villains who joined up were subsequently never seen again. But again, looking at this couple, it's just very, very strange to say the least. Now in for our second spot today, as the White Queen of the Hellfire Club and as the #1 crush of a very large number of comic book nerds, maybe me, I don't know, Emma Frost quickly realized that she could manipulate the men around her, and she barely even needed her telepathy to do it. In Emma's time working with the Hellfire Club, she came face to face with the King of Atlantis, Namor the Submariner. Namor and Emma Frost had a pretty passionate and somewhat long love affair that Namor's never been able to forget, and it often happened behind the backs of other relationships, most notably Emma and Cyclops. Admittedly, a lot of fans probably do know about this pairing, however, they never actually became an official supervillain couple, which I'm sure damaged Namor's massive ego. Namor has attempted to reignite their romance, probably many times, but notably when they worked together as members of Norman Osborn's Cabal. And finally, Doctor Doom is simultaneously one of the most backstabbing, manipulative, horrid villains in the Marvel landscape, but also one of the most badass, eloquent, and even sometimes charming dude from time to time. He has had run-ins with almost every corner of the superhero and supervillain community in some way or another. But one of the strangest ways this happened came when he showed up hand in hand with the sometimes hero, sometimes tragic villain, Scarlet Witch. This strange relationship was revealed when the pair showed up side by side in Avengers: The Children's Crusade. While this relationship was incredibly surprising, as Wanda had really only just started her villain career, it was eventually revealed that Doom had actually been pulling Wanda's strings for years, leading to this moment so that he could take advantage of her sheer reality warping power. Needless to say, Wanda was none too pleased when she found out about this.
Starting off in a very weird place, Nightwing and Catwoman are not normally a pairing you think of when you imagine, well, probably either of these heroes. If anything, Selina should be more like a stepmother figure to Dick than anything else, and honestly, she usually is, so hence why this is very strange, considering how close she is to Batman and how Dick Grayson in the original continuity at least was, well, basically a kid when she first met him. But hey, this is comics. Time. What is time? And sometimes ships do get super weird, which includes, of course, this one. Although they were never a permanent couple, Catwoman has flirted with Nightwing before and even told him not to mention it to Batman. They basically kissed on some rafters. It was a whole weird thing. However, it seemed like her real motive here was kind of to like hit on Nightwing in the hopes of making Batman jealous. Yikes. Selina, please. I'm just fortunate that this relationship has never gone anywhere permanent. Thank goodness. This next couple is less weird, but still pretty weird. Honestly, what is the weirdest couple that you can think of? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear about it. And let me know if you think it's more or less weird than this next one, or than the last one. The last one was pretty weird, to be honest. Power, Princess, and Hulk are maybe not a pairing you would have guessed would have been on this list, but honestly, when I think of these two characters, their being together, for a night anyway, does make sense given what I know of them. However, it should be noted that they had to travel to a different dimension to make this happen. Power Princess ended up coming to the Ultimate Universe where she met Ultimate Hulk, and after fighting him, slept with him. At least it's very heavily implied. There have been a few different versions of Power Princess for those who aren't familiar with her. This one hails from the Squadron Supreme and is basically a Greek goddess, also going by the name of Princess Zarda. She's basically Marvel's version of Wonder Woman. If you were thinking that, yeah, she's basically that. And she initially had a relationship with Squadron Supreme member Hyperion, who was basically Marvel's Superman. Or one of them anyways, they kind of have a few. Meanwhile, Ultimate Hulk is like 616 Hulk, but usually more raunchy and also gray. Hence why, although this is weird, it kinda does make sense. Heading over to the animated world of DC, this next couple is one that surprised me personally when I heard about it. Now you gotta keep in mind I'm coming from the comics here. I've heard of Superboy and Wonder Girl, but I never would have expected Superboy and Miss Martian to be a thing. I guess they do have a similar past when you consider that Miss Martian is an alien from another world, one of the last of her kind, and Superboy is a clone of an alien who was the last of his kind. So I guess close enough. These two were a strange pairing in the Young Justice animated series, and while some honestly love them together, others were also somewhat caught unawares and confused by this pairing in the series. What's even more bizarre is that this controversial ship was made canon in the comics recently when the two also started dating in the main comic book continuity as well. While many of the Young Justice relationships are not quite as concrete, I would say, this next relationship was honestly quite serious. Kitty Pryde and Star-Lord were such a serious couple that they literally almost were married. Yeah, they were engaged and it seemed like they may even actually end up together and tie that knot, despite them initially having a weird long distance relationship at the beginning, with Star-Lord in space and Kitty of course down on Earth with the X-Men. Kitty came to space to rescue Peter, and for a while they had some fun space adventures together. They got engaged and Peter ended up inheriting his father's role as King of Spartax after his father was overthrown, and also after Kitty basically saved all of Spartax. Yeah, it was a crazy thing. And if you're wondering, yeah, it is kinda like in the MCU where Peter, yeah, still has father issues. His dad might not be Ego, a villain in the MCU who's also a planet, but instead he is the villain Jason, the former ruler of Spartax. Peter's time as ruler added strain onto many of his close relationships, including his relationship with Kitty, and so the relationship didn't end up lasting. And then Kitty was gonna marry Colossus, and that also didn't happen, so yeah. Personally, I ship Kitty and Magic. I'm still waiting for that to happen. Going along with the lines of the oddness for me of Catwoman and Nightwing, we have this next couple. Now, if you're a fan of the Young Justice animated series, you likely have seen this one before, as you likely previously were familiar with Miss Martian and Superboy, and if you didn't know about it, I would be surprised. Especially if you say that you've watched Young Justice. I'd be like, wait, but have you? But I've included it because, like I said, as someone who has yet to watch Young Justice, I know, I need to get on that. I hear you all in the comments where you're like, Amanda, why aren't you watching Young Justice? You need to watch all of Young Justice. I'll do it eventually. This relationship though did surprise the heck out of me as someone that isn't familiar with the show. Coming from the comics, Zatanna is often firmly shipped with John Constantine, and sometimes in other animated series and the comics, Batman. Considering that these characters are generally seen as being from an entirely different generation, seeing her shipped with Nightwing was honestly surprising to me. Apparently in the show it was also considered a controversial ship among fans, probably because of that comic book history. Let me know what you think of it in the comments. Are you here for Zatanna and Nightwing? How do you feel about this ship from Young Justice? How do you feel about all the ships from Young Justice? What's the best one? Should I watch Young Justice? The answer is definitely going to be yes. I doubt anyone will say no. This next one isn't as random, but most people would simply not think of these two getting together. But when you think about Wasp, honestly, it kind of seems possible. Seems like she kind of has a type. And when you think of Tony, well, I mean, his type is mainly just attractive ladies, of which he knows many. So honestly, kind of makes sense to me. It's not surprising that these two really got together. together. Also, they're both superheroes and Avengers, so they have that in common, as well as, of course, years of history working together, so they would know each other pretty well, you'd think. Still, this romance did end up feeling kind of random and shoehorned in, which is why most people probably don't think about it and forgot that it happened, or didn't know at all. That and the fact that Janet is so romantically linked to Hank Pym in our minds, even though their relationship ended up being honestly pretty toxic, so. In the comics anyways, not in the MCU, thank goodness. Coming up is a couple that surprisingly had quite a controversial relationship. Shazam and Stargirl is one that probably makes a lot of sense to folks out there, but it was actually considered to be pretty taboo when it first happened. At least in the superhero community, it was. This is because not everyone knows that Shazam, or Captain Marvel as he was formerly known, is Billy Batson in disguise. Most people think he's a grown adult superhero, although with how he behaves sometimes, it's odd that there aren't more people who are honestly suspicious of this really, but hey, I digress. Stargirl, however, doesn't have an alternate form. She always appears as her true age, looking like a teenage girl, because, well, she is a teenage girl. And I think you can see where the issue comes in, despite the fact that Billy and Courtney were actually around the same age. If not, actually I believe they were the exact same age. I think they were both 16 when they kinda started getting together. Their blossoming romance though had to be cut short when Billy refused to let slip the truth of his secret identity. To put his fellow heroes at ease and maintain his secret, he just basically decided to cut off their relationship. Although I think he also left the JSA after that, the Justice Society of America, so I don't know. Seems like a weird choice. But I guess, you know, probably shouldn't do that if you're gonna tell people, I'm actually a teenager, it's fine. It's still a weird thing, even if you are a teenager, to be honest. I was surprised at how well this next, very randomly seeming couple worked. She-Hulk is the character that I know quite a bit about when it comes to her romantic history. I've done a few videos talking about She-Hulk here on the channel and her romantic past, but this is a relationship I never would have guessed would have worked for her, and yet it really kinda did. Honestly, when I was reading this comic, I was like, wow, what a random pairing. There's so many other people I'd rather see She-Hulk with, but they won me over in the end. This relationship comes to us from the previous 2021 She-Hulk series. I think Marvel relaunched She-Hulk recently. I think there's a new 2023 series or something like that, but it's with the same creative team though. I need to go and read it. I need to get caught up on my She-Hulk, so pardon me. So we're back to one now, and back to Sensational She-Hulk. That's the new title for the relaunch, but the new old title. But in the previous run by the same team, we saw Jen return not just to her job as a lawyer working to defend superheroes, but we also saw her return to having a relationship with a character who was long believed to be dead, Jack of Hearts. And this time their relationship was not just as colleagues and friends, it gets quite romantic. How is this possible given Jack's powers? Well, they've actually been nullified, which means that he can touch Jennifer without having to worry about interfering with her gamma radiation, because that was a whole issue, especially the last time they were together, and it's recapped in the comic as well for you if you didn't know about it. And honestly, Jack's romantic, kind, and gentle nature works really well with Jennifer's sensitive yet very like go-getter, like kick-butt attitude. I actually really liked them together in the end. Next up is a relationship that recently resurfaced. Dick Grayson wasn't always Dick Grayson, in case you forgot. If you did forget, I'm sorry that I have to remind you about this. There was a time when he forgot who he was and he went by the name of Rick. It was during this time that he had a romance with Bea, a bartender, or Beatrice. Well, neither of them ever felt fully comfortable opening up to each other, and Rick was somewhat unable to due to his, of course, his memory loss. It was recently revealed in the Nightwing series that Bea had her own secrets. Turns out Bea was the adoptive daughter of Reuben Blood, the quartermaster of the Hold. The Hold is a secret seafaring organization and bank, a very secure bank, which also guards some of the most valuable treasure in all of Bloodhaven. Recently, the quartermaster was killed, and it was revealed that Beatrice was actually his daughter, Bea Blood, or Captain Blood, and in learning of her backstory, we discovered there was more to Nightwing's ex than meets the eye. I'm excited to share this final couple with you, and also, it's reminding me again how I really need to read through all the Jed MacKay Black Cat stuff. Honestly, it just looks so good. Fun fact, Black Cat is another one of my bi babes in the comics. What is a bi babe, Amanda, you may ask? A bi babe is a bisexual character who is also a babe. Spoiler alert, most bisexuals happen to be babes, whether they be men, women, or any other gender, just FYI. At least according to Amanda. These are the rules according to Amanda. All the bi babes. Black Cat is one of that amazing group, and in the last few years we've also gotten to know more about her romantic relationships that she's had in the past. A lot of the ones that we never even knew about. Most people know her as simply an ex of Spider-Man, but Black Cat has had many love affairs over over the years, of which Peter is merely one. He's merely one of them. It was established in canon that Tamara Blake was one such paramour of Black Cat's. We learned this in Jed McKay's Black Cat series when Blake herself, an internationally known thief, resurfaced as the Iron Cat. Also, Black Cat and Iron Cat, like, I just mean, who doesn't ship that? That just sounds good on paper.
Starting off the list today, the third volume of Secret Avengers is an interesting comic. Honestly, it's quite good, but something I don't believe I will ever come to understand is how we got a plot line that saw MODOK, the mechanized organism designed only for killing, becoming part of the Avengers, and then he saves the day by crushing hard on the at-the-time director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Maria Hill. And she actually seems to reciprocate. MODOK saves the day from a cosmic monstrosity and a mad scientist by using his strong romantic feelings for Maria Hill to overpower their influence. Now, after this big murderous head proclaims his love to a seemingly unconscious Maria Hill, you'd expect her to be kind of uncomfortable upon coming to learn this info, but instead she walks up to his house the next day to have a chat that genuinely sounds like she's considering trying to date the reformed villain, especially because she goes inside his house for tea. Someone on the internet referred to Maria Hill as one of the most emotionally repressed characters to ever grace Marvel's pages, so pairing her up with MODOK actually sort of works in some kind of weird way. Now, taking place in Birds of Prey Volume 1, number 31, Ra's al Ghul decided that he needed a bit of a change to his life. Barbara Gordon, Oracle, sent her detective friend Jason Bard to follow her teammate at the time, Black Canary, as she had started seeing a mysterious rich older man, and Barbara was worried that something wasn't quite right. That was some great Bat Family intuition, as that rich older man turned out to be frickin' Ra's al Ghul. Ra's was masquerading as a count and wanted to seduce Black Canary into marrying him and joining the League of Assassins, which, okay man, you do you. Now Canary, really weirdly, was actually pretty into him at first, but the relationship took a bit of a turn when she found out about his goal of manipulating and turning her to the dark side, and so naturally, she rejected his advances. Instead, Ra's tries to change her mind by stealing her away and taking her to the Lazarus pits in hopes of destroying her mind and making her susceptible to his advances. Now luckily, Oracle arrived in time to stop Ra's al Ghul, but in the ensuing battle, Laurel, Black Canary, was injured. Barbara put her into the pit to save her, and as a side effect, Black Canary regained her canary cry, which is a good thing. Now, although she is better known for her long-standing relationship with Daredevil, Elektra and Frank Castle, the Punisher, once became a power couple. Which is so weird because, let's be honest, Elektra is not exactly a full-on good guy. Sure, you could say the same for Frank Castle, but his whole thing is wiping out criminals, and that's kind of what she is. Just saying. Either way, it happened, and as you might expect for these two, it kind of ended in tragedy. Their relationship was revealed to us in 2013's Thunderbolts number 7 after Deadpool hits on Elektra, and she turns him down by revealing that she was already hitting the hay with Punisher. Now back in Punisher number 27, Frank had been targeting the hideouts of various different mob members, only to find Elektra had already taken out everyone each time he showed up. When he crashed the penthouse of a mob boss named Vic Strega, Punisher arrived just in time to watch Elektra cut the man's heart out. He then asked her out, and Punisher had Strega's heart bronzed and gave it to Elektra as a romantic gesture in Thunderbolts number 30, which is weird. Unfortunately, the end came when the Punisher took it upon himself to end the life of Elektra's criminal brother, and I mean, the two just couldn't really see eye to eye after that one. Not sure why. Now listen, no one will ever love you as much as you love yourself. Or at least if you're someone as insane as Harley Quinn, that is absolutely the case. Proven by the fact that she actually dated herself from another universe. Taking place in the miniseries Harley's Little Black Book, which actually detailed a few of Quinn's weird relationships like the one with Lobo, Harley Quinn found herself in a romantic situation with herself. Specifically, the version of herself from DC's Bombshells, who was honestly drastically different from the main universe Harley at this time. Them being so different from one another made it a little bit less weird, but it's still kinda weird. It kind of almost reminds me of Loki falling for Sylvie in the Loki TV show, although Harley's Little Black Book definitely came way before and was way less serious. Now moving on, while the Scarlet Witch is known by many to have had her biggest love interests in the form of Vision and even Wonder Man, when she first ever ever joined on the Avengers, she actually had a big old crush on Captain America. This was pretty quickly forgotten about in place of Vision coming into her life, but way later on, Wanda and her early crush Capsicle got their time in the pink light of love. The pair began a quiet romance in Captain America and the Falcon #6, but unfortunately, Wanda can go a little crackerjack bonkers from time to time, and their relationship started shortly before Avengers Disassembled, which saw Wanda go bananas and wipe out multiple Avengers and led directly to the House of M and eventually M-Day. Needless to say, the two did not stick together. Now, sometime after the hero Tigra, or whatever you want to call her, had become romantically involved with teammates Henry Pym and Wonder Man at the same time when on the West Coast Avengers, during Secret Invasion, Tigra began dating who she thought was Hank Pym. He actually ended up being a Skrull imposter named Kriti Null. And then, he actually turned out to be a clone of a Skrull imposter named Kriti Null. So, Tigra was dating a clone of a shapeshifting alien who was pretending to be a fellow Avenger. And then, she discovered that she was pregnant. Understandably, Tigra was very fearful of the child she was carrying due to the father being a Skrull. Sorry, a clone of a Skrull. She did eventually give birth to a healthy, normal baby boy named William. Normal in that he was also kind of a cat person. William is genetically Hank Pym's son, so Tigra took him to meet his sister Nadia Van Dyne at her birthday party. When the real Hank Pym returned, he had no memory of the relationship or any clue that he was now technically a father, but unlike a lot of relationships in comics, Hank and Tigra embarked on a real, mature relationship where they even discussed their hopes and fears and expectations of each other, and from that point could move on to build a future together. But alas, the relationship was pretty much forgotten after the cancellation of Avengers Academy, where most of it took place. Now listen, sometimes the best and most impactful of romantic partners walk into our lives through mere happenstance. And other times, that fateful romantic partner is quite literally the devil, and that unfortunately is what happened to the mutant known as Magma. During the Fear Itself event, when the New Mutants were trying to get to the Norse realm of Hell, that is spelled with one L, to help Hela and Danny Moonstar, the mutant Cypher had his own powers somehow fail him, and he messed up the teleportation spell, accidentally saying Hell with two L's instead. The mutants, among whom was Magma, landed in Mephisto's realm of Hell, and she made a deal with him in order to get sent to the right place. The deal she made was to go on a date with Mephisto. Understandably, she didn't enjoy this date because she was also understandably a little scared of being duped or tricked. The biggest twist though happens when Mephisto confronts her about it and reveals that because his appearance is based on a person's perception of him, he still experiences a full spectrum of human emotions, including love, and he legit just wanted to have a normal date. And then after that, they begin actually casually dating until she finds out about his ownership of the Desir. That is the thing that did it for her, not the whole he's the devil. Weird. And moving out from that weird relationship, in Age of X-Men Extremists, Fred Dukes, also known as the Blob, has gone from being a dumb, evil, and slightly uncomfortable villain to a granola bar road trip dad in the Age of X-Men. And alongside that, he's caught the eye of someone a lot of you nerds would spend countless moments salivating over: Psylocke. Don't lie, I know it's true. Now this new Blob and Psylocke are a pairing that actually works way better than you might think. But for those of you wondering why or how this happened, the writer of this comic, Leah Williams, actually answered that for us. Responding to a Redditor who asked the very question of why or how Psylocke would end up with the Blob in AOX, she's not in a really good mental place before AOX considering everything, and then being brainwashed on top of that for the storyline of AOX isn't going to make things any better. She sort of feels like she's lucid dreaming. She's distant, aloof, and dreamy, but Blob in AOX is very different because of how this world affected him. He's warm and goofy and a bit of a daydreamer. Betsy immediately connects with his unabashed sense of self because it's something that she is lacking at that moment, and that's before she becomes fascinated by his attraction to her. She's looking at herself through his adoring eyes and using what she finds there to inform her sense of self. And there you have it. That's actually rather sweet. It didn't last though. Now, I'm sure most of you nerds do know about this next one, so this point is for 1, the people who didn't know, but 2, it's for me because I love it. Although you'd assume that the relationship between Otto Octavius and and Spider-Man's Aunt May would be inherently kinda icky, it's actually surprisingly really pleasant, even though the pair weren't meant to last. Otto is shown to have a real and genuine affection for Aunt May, with the pair even almost getting married at one point, which is how most of you probably know about this whole debacle. Who you should really feel bad for here though, is Peter Parker. While Peter has struggled with this little romance like most normal people might, except for this being a superhero issue, he's also had quite the unwanted peek into their relationship. In The Amazing Spider-Man number 699, where Otto swaps bodies with Peter Parker, Spider-Man is trapped in Otto's aunt-loving body, and what do you know, he also has access to Otto's memories, which leads to the lovely little moment where Peter gets a lovely little memory which appears to detail the villain and his aunt, pseudo-mom, going to the town of Pound. And lastly today, I'm ending this list off with another point I'm sure people know about, but I simply do not give a damn because it's great. In one alternate reality, the Greek demigod and Avenger, Hercules, and the mutant and also Avenger, Wolverine, were lovers. Fans met them when the X-Men formed the Extreme X-Men to hunt down evil versions of Professor X in different universes across the multiverse. Hailing from the reality of Earth 12025, this version of our feral mutant is the Governor General of the Dominion of Canada and Viceroy to Her Majesty's expedition to Shangri-La, whatever that means. He is like a version of Wolverine who is also mixed with President Theodore Roosevelt, and Hercules is his lover, partner, and adventure buddy. These two shared a love that was built after years and years of working together, becoming their world's greatest heroes, and their bond was so strong that Herc even gave James a super cool upgrade in the form of a skeleton made of adamantine, which is a godly golden metal even stronger than adamantium, which also made Wolverine completely indestructible and immune to telepathic attacks. Unfortunately though, at first they were forced to keep it secret because their queen forbade homosexual relationships and Zeus forbade any god but himself from consorting with mortals. But then they revealed the relationship anyways and fought side by side in the pits of Tartarus against damned souls until they were rescued 4 years later. Very cool.
Next up, this isn't a couple you typically expect to see, which is why it makes my cut. But at the end of the day, while random, it doesn't mean that it's bad. In fact, what this relationship represented for both characters was kinda interesting. It also leads into one of the best series in the Age of X-Men era, which overall is a pretty weird and kind of controversial era, I think, for a lot of comic book fans in the X-Men history for sure. In Age of X-Men, the whole reason that Bishop basically ends up in prison, as seen in the Age of X-Men Prisoners, which is the one that I'm saying is, you know, one of the best series, is because of his secret love affair with Jean Grey. This is because love and intimate relationships are outlawed in this world, all part of Nate Gray's plan to save the world and turn it into a paradise, by removing the conflicts often created by love. The original idea was to have Bishop in a secret love affair with Storm, according to Marvel senior editor Jordan White, but they ultimately decided to pair him with Jean instead because, well, Jean doesn't get to have a variety of romances really in the comics, which honestly is really true. She primarily is either paired with Wolverine or Cyclops, so to see her paired with Bishop, it's weird, but it's kinda cool. I kinda like it for them. Although I guess it's also kinda weird because when you think about the fact that Bishop is good friends with Cable, it's kinda like Jean's son. That's a little bit weird, but there's a lot of things that are weird. I just realized that. When it comes to just weird connections in comics, I mean, there's a lot of them. Is there any weird ones that you have read before where people were related but were romantically interested, or just like there's weird time travel things that just make it bizarre? Let me know what you think some of the weirdest relationships in comics are in the comments, because honestly, even when I think I'm talking about something that isn't weird, it is. That's so strange. This next one is honestly really a doozy. One of the worst on our list. The worst! And if you're wondering how it can possibly get worse than what I'm about to tell you now, I encourage you to stick around until the very end of this video because it can get worse, I know. Although this one is definitely up there for me personally. We're talking about the terrible pairing of Hal Jordan and Arisia Rabb. Both superheroes, both Green Lanterns, one of whom was more like a kid sister to the other. And yeah, I'm not talking about Hal. Hal was not the kid sister in this scenario. Yeah, Arisia had basically like a schoolgirl crush on Hal that ended up manifesting in her using her ring to basically age herself up. Well, initially Initially, Hal did rebuke Aricia's interest in him. Once she kind of willed herself to be aged up using her powers, he became a little bit more open to the idea of them being in a romantic relationship. If you're thinking that sounds super weird and disturbing, yes it was. Scarlet Witch and Captain America are an odd couple because they aren't a couple you'd normally think of happening in the comics, especially if you are a fan whose initial introduction to these two was mainly through the MCU. They also mostly get together because Scarlet Witch is kinda lonely. Scarlet Witch is like, look, she got a lot of issues. I feel bad for her, really. And at least when we're talking about her motivation, I think in this relationship, that's kinda why. Also, like I said, she was going through a lot of stuff. The relationship was kind of part of that, being inherently problematic, just a bunch more of Wanda's stuff overflowing, as Wanda had basically ensorcelled Captain America to make him believe they were more of an item than they were. Fortunately, he broke free of her control, but there is also an alternate world where they actually just end up together earlier on, and Wanda ultimately kind of just like gets her hooks in Cap. The two become a couple who are responsible for basically reshaping the world, forcing it into this paradise vision they have for it after turning on their friends in their own alternate Avengers Disassembled. Basically like Avengers Disassembled if they were teamed up together, which honestly is pretty sad. Oh boy, oh bub. We are not talking about Wolverine in this next couple, but the next one is making me channel the sheer amazed reaction of Wolverine to his like flame covered adamantium coated claws just on the ground like ah, at least in the fan edited version of that page where he returns from death with his flame claws. If you haven't seen it, it's great. There's just so many bubs on the page. When I first read it, I thought it was real, and then I went back to Return of Wolverine and I was like, man, I wish that fan edit was real. It's kind of great. Here we're talking about a couple from DC Comics, Batman and Black Canary. If you're thinking that sounds bizarre, that's because, well, it is. While these two briefly were a part of a love triangle in the main continuity in the past, way in the past, this relationship from Frank Miller's Batman universe, as seen in All-Star Batman and Robin, is honestly just so random. Why do these two hook up? I guess just because they're both insanely hot vigilantes? I got nothing else. This relationship is even more random than the last, and if you're thinking how is that possible, trust me, it's possible. It happened when Tony Stark's Iron Man found himself teaming up with the Guardians of the Galaxy. One night at a bar where they were all out together, he started to kinda like flirt with Gamora, and surprisingly, Gamora flirted back with him. They ended up back on the spaceship and had a quick fling. Sometime after Iron Man applied he could do better than just impressing a woman with his wealth. After they, finished, Gamora decided to go back to the bar. Meanwhile, Iron Man seemingly just chose to stay in bed in some level of pain after their encounter. I have to imagine based on Gamora's characterization that, he had an experience. This next one is just straight up weird. Batwoman and Nocturna were not in a healthy relationship, which is honestly why they're making my cut here. It's weird and it's gross in a bad way. Nocturna in essence manipulated Kate into having a relationship with her, and this relationship kind of also followed the very serious one Kate had with Maggie, which wasn't manipulative and actually almost led to these two women getting married in the comics. Unfortunately, there were too many hurdles for the couple and the creative team behind their engagement to climb for the two to end up with their happy ending, down the aisle, finally committing to each other. Alas, they ended up breaking off their engagement, and instead Kate was trapped in this toxic relationship with Nocturna for a while. A relationship where Nocturna manipulated Kate into being with her, and then also made Kate believe that she herself was a vampire and a monster, when really that's basically Nocturna's thing, not Kate's thing. Nocturna really seemed to be competing with the Joker here for the worst romantic partner in all of comic book history award, although I think the Joker still takes it. This next ship is just a weird one, but especially when you consider that these two very nearly tied the knot. They both come from two kind of different but adjacent worlds. We're talking about Star-Lord from Guardians of the Galaxy and Kitty Pryde, aka Kate or Cat from the X-Men. The adjacent bit is that both these teams are known to go to space. They got lots of space adventures. While the X-Men are an Earth-based primarily team, they do have a lot of space adventures, it's true. Which was how Kitty met Peter. They decided to keep in contact even though Kitty went back to Earth with the X-Men and Peter remained in space, and began a sort of like long distance relationship thing. This would eventually lead to Kitty coming to space to rescue Peter, and then choosing to remain there and kind of date and go on adventures with him more. Eventually they'd become engaged, and he'd even have to leave the Guardians and she would basically take over for him. for a while as Star-Lord. Even though these two are kinda weird together in some ways, they do still work as a couple, I have to admit, but neither of them is really the first person you'd think of when it comes to either's ideal or most iconic relationships. Like, they work together, but it's still just kinda weird. Batman and Batgirl are an even more bizarre pairing. This is because they are literally like family, and there is such a big age gap that's implied to be between them. Batman is the friend and ally of Jim Gordon, who in many continuities is Barbara Gordon's father, either adoptive or biological, so that's kinda like Batman dating his friend's kid, kinda? Yeah, it's messed up. Fortunately, these two have not made their way to the main comic book continuity as a couple, and instead are pretty much only paired up in the Batman animated series universe, which there are comics of, but it's not main continuity, but you know, still, yeah. If you thought Batman and Batgirl together were strange as two people who are close to having a kind of a father-daughter, or at least kind of like an uncle-niece relationship, this next one is going to straight up blow your mind. We're talking about the relationship between Superman and Supergirl. Yeah, what? Well, don't worry. As strange as this one may sound, it happened in an alternate reality where the two are actually not cousins at all. In fact, both of them are actually from different realities than each other. This was Linda Danvers, who was only kind of filling in for Kara at the time in the comics, and unlike Kara, she was not a Kryptonian and she was not related to Superman. The Superman she ended up with was also, I believe, a different version of Superman from Earth 1, not the New Earth version. New Earth at that time was the main continuity of DC, this before Prime Earth, I digress. Still, just the idea of Superman and Supergirl ending up as married, just looking at that on a page, given that most people usually think of them as cousins, is pretty weird. It's pretty weird that we paired them at all. Finally, the pièce de résistance, the most nonsensical couple I have for you today, Nate Gray and Madeline Pryor. Insanely bizarre when you consider that Madeline Pryor is the mother of Cable, aka Nathaniel Summers, who is an alternate version of course, Nate Gray. And even if we're willing to let this go somewhat, because Maddie isn't actually Nate's mom since he's from an alternate world, he just looks kinda similar to and is an alternate version of her son Cable, there is still the fact that Madeline is of course a clone of Jean Grey, and Jean Grey is still Nate's biological mother. The only way I can even think of how Marvel justified this when they gave it a pass and were like, yeah, you can print that, is that Nate wasn't actually raised by Scott or Jean really in his universe. He was like a test tube baby created by Sinister who escaped Sinister's clutches, and then instead he was raised by his adoptive father Forge. But still, this is weird, right? The genetic crossover it's weird.
This couple's history is messy to say the least. Krakoa and Arakko are two sentient islands, which that sentence is already so wild. Krakoa comes up a lot in the X-Men universe. It's a mutant island on Earth that eventually turned into the home nation for the Earth's mutant population. Arakko is not on Earth, but instead in the dark dimension known as Amenth. The natural inhabitants of Amenth are demons, so you can guess the vibe in there. Someone from that realm named Summoner was sent to Earth on a mission and took part of Arakko as his mode of transportation. This piece was known as the Arak Coral. Summoner parked right beside Krakoa and the two islands joined together, and if we go off the dialogue shared by the X-Men witnessing it, we are supposed to take this in the romantic sense. This is already weird, but are you ready for a twist? Turns out the two islands used to be one human-shaped mutant known as Akora. As Akora grew older, they also grew in size, eventually becoming a massive island mutant. Akora was attacked by someone wielding the Twilight Sword and split in half, opening a portal to Amenth. That's how Arakko ended up in there, and Krakoa stayed on Earth.
Now, when it comes to the character of Kitty Pryde and her romantic partners, most people will think of Colossus, who had a pretty controversial relationship with Kitty, who was 14 compared to his 19 when they first met. That relationship didn't properly start until Kitty had come of age, but it still rubbed people the wrong way. Fans of the Ultimate Universe may also think of Peter Parker and that failed romance, and more recent fans may think of her and Peter Quill. But most people definitely don't think about Rachel Summers. No one saw that coming, and even when it was happening, most people had no idea. Sure, there were hints at it and innuendos, but it wasn't until Colossus came back from the dead that the relationship even became known to us, and that's only because of Rachel actually ending the relationship between her and Kitty Pryde. Otherwise, it's very likely no one would have known at all, and it would have just been fan speculation. However, I think maybe the biggest hint at the relationship was from the alternate reality of X-Men The End, where Kitty Pryde had 3 children together with Rachel Summers. That cements it pretty well. Shout out to Chris Claremont for sticking with the underlying idea that Kitty's true love is actually Rachel Summers.
Let's meet our next lovebirds. One half half is Lila Cheney, a rock superstar mutant. She is capable of powerful intergalactic teleportation, even as far across as the Milky Way. The other half is Samuel Guthrie, also known as Cannonball. He can generate thermochemical energy and release it from his skin. Essentially, he can blast himself around like a cannonball. The two meet in the New Mutants Annual #1 when Cannonball saved Lila's life. Their romance starting shortly after. They did have to take it slow. Lila's career was demanding. She is an international superstar after all. They had a sweet romance. She visited his hometown, met his parents, he attended a few of her concerts, but things took a turn for the worst when Lila was captured. Cannonball and the New Mutants went after her and found her again, but to escape, there was of course a battle and Lila sacrificed herself, or so we thought. Much later, we find out she's still out there in the cosmos. When Cannonball found out, he was already stressed with work, so he decided to take time off to go get her back. When reunited, the two rekindle their relationship again, but eventually separate due to not being able to find peace together. Cannonball went on to join the Extreme X-Men, and Lila continued being a superstar.
But Sam Guthrie comes from a large family of other superpower beings, and he absolutely is not the only one of his siblings to have a romance. But while Sam and Lila kind of kept things slow and low-key, the same cannot be said for Sam's 19-year-old sister, Paige Guthrie, otherwise known as Husk, and her 30-year-old squeeze came in the form of Warren Worthington III, one of the founding members of the X-Men, Angel. The age difference between these two is large for sure, but it's not the biggest gap we've seen. The real concerning point for this couple came with an extremely uncomfortable moment in Uncanny X-Men 440 when Warren and Paige decide to just fully give in to their love for each other in the sky in front of Paige's mom, who Warren had just explained the situation to. It's awkward, and then to make it more kind of hilarious or worse depending on your perspective, the bad guys show up on the ground level while they're just mid-air sans clothing. That's all I can really say about this relationship.
This next couple took decades to resolve their love story. The Beauty and the Beast of the 1980s, Dazzler and Beast, first met in Hollywood. Dazzler, a shimmering performer down on her luck, and Beast, a blue guy on vacation with big dreams of being on the big screen. The main problem they face is that at this point, the world isn't super fond of having new celebrities. Dazzler is promised the chance to perform for Hollywood's elite and jumps at it, only to discover the performance is less singing and more of a gladiator fight. The under-Hollywood fighting ring is eventually busted when Beauty and the Beast lead a revolt. Their romance in the 80s was limited to the 4 comics in the Beauty and Beast line, and the pair did break it off at the end. Dazzler went on to receive her own comic line, and in the last panel of the last issue, Beast made an appearance to ask Dazzler to join his new team of X-Men. This gets left on a cliffhanger for over 20 years, finally resolved by Dazzler superfan writer John McCann. His story in Marvel's Heartbreakers Volume 1 involved a sweet meeting between former lovers, some slow dancing, and Dazzler finally answering Beast's question. She did not want to join his team. For us readers, we kinda knew that already, but the events of Dazzler 42, Heartbreakers 1 happened close together, so for Beast, he didn't have to wait that long. Dazzler did go on to find her happily ever after with another mutant, but I will make you wait just a bit longer to hear about that one. It won't be decades though, not by a long shot.
But Dazzler is not the only person to be courted by the big blue of the X-Men. This is one I actually had not even the slightest clue about, but Jean Grey, who most people know for her romance with Cyclops and the love triangle between those two and Wolverine, is another Belle de Ball that the X-Men Beast has romanced over the years. But to be fair, this happened with 2 different versions of Jean Grey than the one we are used to seeing with Cyclops. But the fact that it happened twice leads me to believe that there is a strong case for Jean always having some kind of underlying attraction to Hank Pym. The first time we ever saw this romance came in X-Men Forever when the alternate reality versions of the characters hooked up and became a couple. But this did actually happen in the main Marvel 616 reality as well, when a time-displaced Jean Grey chose Beast over her hubby-bubby boo, Cyclops, in all-new X-Men issue number 15. And honestly, Cyclops has made more than enough strange and pretty bad romantic choices that it just kind of felt fair that he got robbed of Jean this once, just to be honest. Sorry.
The wait is over. Our second romance for Dazzler happened long after her romance with Beast ended, but it's equally as sweet. Dazzler and Longshot first met in Uncanny X-Men issue 215 and ended up being the couple that worked out for the long run. Her and her new beau share a love of the music scene. Dazzler is quite the performer, and part of her soon-to-be husband's look was based on the popular 80s performer Limahl. The two would tour through towns for Dazzler to perform and chat with local townsfolk. Like all super couples, they eventually got into interdimensional trouble and were forced to take part in the Mojoverse version of The Wizard of Oz. They followed the Yellow Brick Road all the way to breaking Mojo's influence, and it's implied that Longshot killed Mojo. Finally, knowing some level of peace, our superstars did settle down in the Mojoverse and get married. They were even expecting a child. That child ended up becoming Shatterstar. We will get to a bit later on.
Okay, this next one is kind of just strange to me, as well as not being known to a lot of people. For starters, this relationship
relationship is based on nothing other than a nurse doing her job. When the mutant Alex Summers, aka Havoc, was put into a coma, his nurse, Annie Gazakanian, who I shall now refer to as simply Nurse Annie, was the one who cared for him. During the time she was caring for the comatose Alex Summers, she actually somehow fell in love with him, and even moved to the Xavier Institute to continue her care for him. This is where it's rather important to add that Nurse Annie was particularly anti-mutant, being pretty passive-aggressive with that sentiment too. So, it was interesting that when the Summers brother recovered from his coma, he went on to reciprocate the love of this nurse, the nurse that fell in love with her unconscious patient. Havoc was so down bad for Nurse Annie that he even left his fiancée, Polaris, a fiancée whom he had a great relationship with that no one had a problem with, was the daughter of an incredibly powerful mutant, Magneto. A fiancée who he not only left, but left at the altar to pursue a relationship with a mutant disliking nurse who even occasionally went around kissing Bobby Drake. Can you imagine how long Havoc and Nurse Annie lasted? Right, not very long.
As promised, now is the time for Shatterstar to shine. Well, him and his boyfriend Richter. These two made history as the first ever on-panel same-sex kiss in 2009. After decades of subtext between the two characters, X Factor Volume 3, number 45 laid any doubts to rest. In this comic, Shatterstar's mind is taken over by the villain Cortex, forcing him to fight Richter and fellow hero Strong Guy. It isn't until the mind link between Cortex and Shatterstar gets interrupted that Shatterstar can break free. Once that happens, Shatterstar and Richter share a kiss of relief. Since this historic moment, the pair have gone on to share romantic confessions on panel, as well as work together on various super teams. Shatterstar even learned Spanish to be able to communicate privately with our Latinx king Richter.
Doreen Green, better known to the wider comic book world as Squirrel Girl, is not a mutant. She is instead a human mutate, which is apparently a big enough difference. So no, she is not an X-Men, but after starting as a joke character and quickly becoming one of the most well-known and fan-loved characters out there, she was bound to have a romance at some point. I just don't think anyone expected that romance to be with actual mutant and X-Men known as Wolverine. The only reason we know about the existence of this relationship, which seems to be very surface level, is due to a brief moment from the New Avengers number 7 where the two promise to be professional around one another despite earlier agreeing to never speak to each other again. So clearly whatever relationship these two shared seemed to go pretty sour. The only other mention I could find of this relationship came in Wolverine number 8, when we get a look inside Wolverine's head, specifically a look inside Wolverine's desires, and we discover that Wolverine seems to still find the squirrel-themed hero very attractive among a handful of his other colleagues. I don't want to think about this anymore, let's move on.
Number 10. Sabretooth and Mystique. Did somebody say toxic? Take one highly violent beast man with a knack and enjoyment for ending lives and hurting people, and pair it with a slippery, manipulative, identity-stealing shapeshifter, and it's bound to be a recipe for disaster. But yet they try and try again. The pair even have a son together, Graydon Creed, and because of them, he absolutely despises mutants. Way to go, Mom and Dad. Their relationships together almost always include some kind of mental or physical torment, and I hope to the one above all that no one has these two as their couple goals. Number 9. Cyclops and Madeline Pryor. So you're Cyclops, right? The red-headed woman you love, Jean Grey, she goes cray-cray and ends up apparently de-lifing on the moon. You're distraught, broken up. You leave your team of letter X themed compatriots, and then along comes another fiery red-headed woman who is the exact copy, some could even say clone, of your long lost love. What do? If you said marry that lookalike at the drop of a hat, then yes, you really are Cyclops. The Mr. Sinister created clone of Jean Grey, Madeline Pryor, got married to this heartbroken Cyclops within like a month. And they even created a little baby in the form of Cable. Then what do you know, Jean Grey shows back up and Cyclops drops his new wife and the baby about as fast as he married her. Cyclops, you giant weirdo. Number 8. Angel and Husk. A few entries on this list have to do with age differences, but most of the other couples who have a huge age gap at least have a tiny bit of decency. The same cannot be said for 30-year-old Warren Worthington III and his 19-year-old girlfriend, Paige Guthrie, otherwise known as Husk. The age difference is large for sure, but it's not the biggest gap we've seen. The real problem comes with an extremely uncomfortable moment in Uncanny X-Men number 440, when Warren and Paige fully give in to their love for each other. In the sky. in front of Paige's mom, who Warren was just explaining the situation to. It's awkward as hell, and then to make it kind of more hilarious / worse, the bad guys show up on the ground while they are mid-air sans clothing. Whole new meaning to PDA right there. Number 7. Hawkeye and Mockingbird. With the inclusion of Clint Barton's family in the MCU, non-comic book fans might be surprised to know that his family wasn't really a thing in the comics, not until the Ultimate Universe version of the character came around. The MCU Hawk family may be an attempt to get away from the awful couple of Hawkeye and Mockingbird, which honestly sort of seems like a cheap way of capitalizing on the Green Arrow and Black Canary coupling that DC had going on. But these two were nowhere near as compatible as the DC counterparts. The best example of that would be the whole thing surrounding a guy called Phantom Rider. Mockingbird is caught and physically mistreated by Phantom Rider, and she eventually gets her revenge, taking the Rider's life. Now Hawkeye, instead of supporting his traumatized partner, is scared off by the fact that she de-lifed her assailant, and he splits up with her. While that could maybe be understandable, it all got retconned so that Mockingbird actually got with Phantom Rider by her own consent. So then, when she took his life for seemingly no reason it seems, Hawkeye just used the killing as an excuse when the real reason was because she cheated. Kinda weird. I don't know. Number 6. Havoc and Nurse Annie. This one is kind of just strange to me. For starters, this relationship is based on nothing other than a nurse doing her job. When the mutant Havoc was put into a coma, his nurse, Annie Gazikanian, whose name I think I utterly butchered and who I shall now refer to as Nurse Annie, was the one who cared for him. During the time she was caring for Alex Summers, she actually fell in love with him and even moved to the Xavier Institute to continue that care. I should also add, Nurse Annie was particularly anti-mutant, being pretty passive-aggressive at times with that sentiment too. So it was interesting that when the Summers brother came back too, he reciprocated the love that this nurse imparted on her unconscious patient. So much so that he even left his fiancée, Polaris, a fiancée whom he had a great relationship with that no one had a problem with, who is the daughter of an incredibly powerful mutant, Magneto. A fiancée who he not only left, but left at the altar to pursue a relationship with a mutant disliking nurse who even occasionally went about kissing Bobby Drake. Can you imagine how long Havoc and Nurse Annie lasted? That's right, not very long. Number 5. Rogue and Magneto. I always think of Rogue being with Remy LeBeau, Gambit. Their relationship is iconic. It has its issues, but it endures it all. Her relationship in the Age of Apocalypse story, however, I do not like. Age of Apocalypse was an awesome alternate dimension story, and I love it. Except for this one thing that just makes me uncomfy. Rogue in this world is a freedom fighter working with Magneto's X-Men, and her friend, Wanda Maximoff, passes on. She makes a promise to be a companion to the Master of Magnetism himself. The two grew closer and closer. This young woman and the 60-year-old leader of the team. So close so that she even chose him over Gambit, leaving Gambit to pass away. She then married Magneto and even had a son with him. She married her best friend's dad because said friend's dying wish was to be his companion. I don't care if their powers cancel each other out or whatever the reason is. It's weird and it's strange and it feels unnatural. And I ain't here for it, people. I ain't here for it. Number 4. Multiple Man and Siren. How can you trust a man who can be in multiple places at once? That's honestly all I should have to say, but for context on why you actually can't, the mutant Jamie Madrox, otherwise known as Multiple Man, was in a relationship with the daughter of Banshee, Teresa Cassidy. And one fateful night he got much too intoxicated, and using his abilities he was able to have conjugal experiences with both his wife and another woman, their teammate Monet St. Croix, or M, at the same time. And then he completely forgot which one he had been with. For some reason, Teresa forgave him, but then she got pregnant, with the baby turning out to just be another multiple of Jamie, who was then reabsorbed back into Jamie's body. What the hell? Number 3. Ultimate Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. We don't want any of this here, please and thank you. Look, Wanda and Pietro Maximoff have been close, always. It's led to some truly awesome and horrible comic book moments. There's no doubting they love each other. As siblings. And that didn't need to change, okay? I understand Marvel was making its Ultimate Universe in a way to make it more realistic and to make their characters just as hateable as they can be without losing readers' interest. But this was just as unnecessary as having the Blob eat Janet Van Dyne. And then you made Wolverine, who was hinted to be their father, come and do some creepy spying on the weird brother-sister couple enact. Why, man? Why? Number 2. Ant-Man and the Wasp. Probably the only relationship on this list that actually ended a comic book character's comic book career. This relationship was bad from the beginning, and that can largely land on Hank Pym's increasingly tiny shoulders. Or large shoulders if he's growing, I don't know. From the moment comic book fans saw him strike his wife and partner, Janet Van Dyne, there was no real saving him. Comic book sales for Ant-Man even took a dip after it happened. Just take the fact that he actually kidnapped her to try and get the relationship to marriage in the first place, and the fact that it worked, and you gotta know this is a bad duo. Sure, Hank Pym has a whole host of mental problems that leads to his codependency and the psychological and physical mistreatment he inflicts on his on-again, off-again lover. But the Wasp, she should absolutely know better than to stay with this lunatic. And in at number 1 is Norman Osborn and Gwen Stacy. This is 100% the creepiest entry on this list, and I don't care who you are or what you say. The Spider-Man story, Sins of the Past, contains within its strange pages the revelation that Gwen Stacy, Peter's former lover and a teenager, was having an ongoing affair with Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, a very creepy, full-grown man old enough to be her father. Not only was she even having an affair, it even resulted with Gwen secretly giving birth to twins. Twins that became a pair of assassins. I do not recommend reading this story because all you'll be able to see when you close your eyes is the incredibly creepy image of Norman and his Green Goblin face as he is laying on top of Gwen. I can't talk about this anymore, I'm getting the creeps. Let's wrap this up now, please.
Number 10. Wasp and Magneto. Wasp and Magneto. This is a relationship that blew my mind when I first found out about it. For me, it's been a few years now since I've known about this romance and first discovered it, but I'm sure most folks out there are kinda surprised to hear about it still, especially if you are newer to comics. This one was from the original Secret Wars event, where it was implied that Magneto and Wasp may have had a brief affair during the event, or at the very least had a flirtation going. It seems to me that Magneto just has mad riz and is basically able to charm just almost anyone in the romance department, regardless of if they're an ally to him or perhaps are even his enemy. Wasp herself was not entirely immune to his charms, it seems, though she did, I think, lean more into the romance in an attempt to survive and to potentially see if she could get vital information out of him. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to let us know you love us by clicking that like button. Number 9. Cyclops and Psylocke. Cyclops is typically a hero you'd think of tied to Jean Grey, aka Marvel Girl, or maybe you prefer him with Emma Frost. Psylocke, on the other hand, has had a few different partners, with none of them being super iconic for me. She's been with Phantom X if I had to think of loves who perhaps were the most iconic for her, I guess. However, most people would never think of shipping Psylocke with Cyclops, especially when we consider that at one point she also kind of flirted with Havoc, I believe. But here we are, comics. Cyclops and Psylocke had a flirtation going strong in the early 90s. It was clear that they both wanted each other, with Psylocke even at times competing with Jean in an attempt to steal Scott away from her. Oh, the 90s, what a time of strange romances. Number 8. The Flash and Raven. The Flash and Raven are a couple most people do not think of when they think of Teen Titans, or as they are now, just Titans and their romances. The Flash and Raven are a couple most people do not think of when they think of romances in regards to the Teen Titans, or as they are known now, just Titans. Currently in the comics, Wally is married to the love of his life, Linda, and they also have their 2 kids back. And Raven is currently with Beast Boy in a very loving and accepting relationship on both sides, based on, you know, what I've seen so far anyways. Both have sturdy partnerships that are basically relationship goals for many of us out there, I imagine. But there was a time when it seemed like Wally and Raven could actually be an item. However, it should be noted that mainly Raven was the one who wanted it to be with Wally, and Wally was kind of rightfully terrified of Raven. Needless to say, the romance didn't end up blossoming into anything. Number 7. Iron Man and Hellcat. Iron Man and Hellcat are another couple that most people don't think of when they think of either of these heroes. I mean, I know I didn't, at least not until recently, not until I saw it happen, and then I was kind of like, wait, what? Well, everyone has likely been talking about Iron Man and Emma Frost lately. Before that was going on, or rather I guess kind of in between when that was going on, Hellcat and Tony almost ended up engaged. Yeah, and can you imagine learning that you were almost engaged to someone and then they ended up marrying someone else? Sounds wild. Although also that sounds like comics. Granted, Hellcat was the one who turned Tony down. She did love him, she just wasn't ready to be married again, and considering her history with marriage, I gotta say, I get it. Number 6. Storm and Dr. Doom. For those who don't know about this bizarre flirtation, which has also consisted of at least one date, but one very strange date, and another more diplomatic dinner between the two rulers, though I'm sure Doom wanted it to be another date, this might seem like an odd pairing. But yes, this is a thing that happened, and oddly, it even kinda works as a ship, to be honest. Even though the date ended extremely poorly with Storm trapped in a chrome casing, her worst nightmare, as at the time, she was still suffering from claustrophobia. It's clear that there is chemistry between these two. In fact, there is even an alternate reality where Doom successfully made Storm his queen, and the pair even have children together. Number 5. Raven and Wallace West. Raven and Wallace West is not a relationship I ever expected to see happen, especially when you consider these characters being from completely different eras in comics should in theory have a pretty large age gap between them. But this being comics, apparently that is something we're just kind of supposed to ignore. It's especially weird though when you consider that, as I previously mentioned, yes, Raven used to have the hots for Wally West, Wallace's much older cousin. At least that was the implication on the age gap between those two that I got when Wally was the Flash and Wallace was his kid Flash during Rebirth, so that also makes it really weird. Number 4. Scarlet Witch and Loki. While this never fully came to fruition, it was such a weird and compelling flirtation, a dance, literally, that we witnessed between Scarlet Witch and Loki that I felt I had to share it with you. I feel like Loki and Wanda have had a bit of a spark now and then in the comics, but it came to a head more recently in the Scarlet Witch series by Steve Orlando and Sarah Pichelli, with Lorenzo Tometa in this issue as well. The issue in question is issue number 8 of the recent 2023 series. When Wanda is tasked with helping a mountain giant of Jotunheim, Arkin, who hopes to reclaim his honor and convince Loki to let him act as a leader for his people, she confronts the newly dubbed God of Stories, and during their dance, Duel of Honesty and Flirtation, the two seemingly realize they have more in common than both of them and us, the readers, might at first suspect. However, in the end, Wanda ultimately decides that their relationship cannot proceed because she still cannot trust Loki to be honest with her, as she observes that he still sometimes struggles with being honest with himself. Honestly, touche. Number 3. Superman and Hope. Superman and Hope are a couple that most people don't think of when they think of Clark. This is because most people either think of Superman and Lana Lang, or more commonly Clark and Lois. Hope, however, was a recent dalliance that Supes had from his long-standing romance and now a rock of a marriage with Lois. She was a Green Lantern that Superman ran into when he was basically stranded away from home. The two had a romance that lasted honestly quite some time, but Hope, who was a Green Lantern, although at first she didn't know it, wasn't willing to part with Clark. And even when a viable way home was found for him, she actually fought to try and keep him by her side. However, he did make it home in the end, and of course made his way back to Lois and she to him, despite the strain Clark's time away put on their relationship. Number 2. Jean Grey and Pyro. Jean Grey and Pyro are a romance you definitely wouldn't expect to see in the comic. But in the first volume of the Marauders comic series, this couple did appear, albeit only in an illusionary world that Emma Frost basically created to prevent Yellowjacket from fully infiltrating Krakoa. Instead, this was a fantasy that Emma chose to feed the villain, who had hitched a ride inside Pyro following a run-in with Hominis Verende. In the illusion, Pyro returns to Krakoa where Jean is seemingly waiting for him. The two kiss before riding off in his sporty hot rod with the top down. Island life. Number 1. Martian Manhunter and Fire. Martian Manhunter is not a hero who is often known for his romances. This is because he mainly is known for one romance that ended so tragically that it seems it affected his ability to love, romantically at least, in the future. That would be the tragic loss of his wife, child, and often in many cases entire homeworld, something John never really gets over in the comics. He's also often a stoic, calm figure whose personality just doesn't seem as well suited to romance or passionate love affairs in regards to his stories. However, in the DC Black Label comic Human Target, we learn of a surprising romance he has with the fellow Justice League International member, Fire, that actually very strangely works in regards to his character. His love affair with Fire plays on his own fear of the element of fire, and it seems he enjoys the pain, the fear, and kind of that rush from that experience. Pretty freaky, to be honest. The heated affair for Fire is more about using John, sadly, but as Martian Manhunter is an insanely powerful telepath, it seems likely that he knew this the whole time, but he was kind of just willing to accept that part of the relationship in exchange for some steamy, freaky nights.
Coming in at number 10, we have Killer Croc and the Enchantress, a couple that's definitely at least a little weird, but is getting more of an honorable mention slot because they're just so dang cute together, with one of them being a cannibalistic crocodile-human hybrid and the other consisting of two magical identities trapped in the same body. These two lovebirds found one another while they were both locked in Belle Reve prison, and recruited recruited to the infamous Task Force X, aka the Suicide Squad. With Croc even going so far to romantically say, "I want to eat everyone, but I don't want to eat you," this is a couple that managed to show that even supervillains can find a little happiness every now and then.
Number 9. White Rabbit and Arcade. This relationship was weird in the sense that it was not very healthy, and the both of these two seemed to really only end up together because they were both villains. I also think it's strange that White Rabbit allowed herself to often be degraded and insulted by Arcade, when normally Lorena Dodson is a very willful woman who, despite not being the best villain around, is extremely independent, preferring to call the shots herself. The other side of this is that Arcade prides himself on his brilliant mind, and White Rabbit isn't really known for her wits. She's more known for her thematic appearance and, like I said, her willfulness. So what really brought these two together? I don't know. But in the end, it definitely was not enough to keep them together. They seem to appear romantically attached in Claws, but break up at the end of that miniseries. However, they seemingly team up again for some reason in Claws 2, which also of course doesn't end well for these villains. What do you expect when you go up against Black Cat and Wolverine? Don't even try to take those two on. It's not a good idea.
Coming in at number 8, we've got the Ultimate Marvel Universe's more villainous versions of Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. And yes, before you ask, they are still siblings in this universe, so yeah, there's some real icky Game of Thrones stuff going on. Abandoning their father, Magneto, and joining up with this universe's superhero team, the Ultimates, this version of Pietro and Wanda are just as close as the main Marvel Universe's siblings, but in a much grosser way. And with this version of Wanda eventually being killed by a love-struck Ultron and driving the grieving Pietro to madness, let's just say it's probably a good idea the MCU decided to go in a very different direction.
Number 7. Rita Repulsa and Lord Zed. Yeah, we're going to the Power Rangers for this one. Why? Well, because I love the Power Rangers. Also, I kinda love this couple, even though they're definitely weird. No? I mean, honestly, imagining Rita in a relationship with anyone is just really strange for me. Lord Zed became Rita's nemesis when it came to villainy and her position as the Power Rangers' #1 enemy, which is kinda what brought these two together. Of course, it wasn't a love at first sight scenario, but more of a love in order to get you to join me so I can have all of the power scenario. How did Rita make Zed fall head over heels for her? Well, with a love potion, of course. But over time, these two actually came to care for one another and even went on to have a child together named Thrax, although some people theorize that Thrax was actually born before they were even married. Thrax in turn would inherit his parents' love of villainy and become an enemy of the Power Rangers himself in the future.
Coming in at number 6, we have the crazed killer combo of Carnage and Shriek. A mutant with a tortured backstory and the ability to control sound waves to devastating results, Shriek felt all alone in the world until she met the infamous serial killer Cletus Cassidy, aka Carnage. Breaking out of prison together, Shriek saw herself as the matriarch of the criminal family created during their breakout, and has often returned to Carnage's side after his many defeats over the years. While Carnage himself often did seem to experience his own twisted form of romance towards Shriek, he most recently gave up any chance at love when he betrayed Shriek in order to help summon the symbiote god Null. It was far from a happy ending for a far from happy couple.
Number 5. Harley Quinn and Rick Flag. Basically, many Suicide Squad relationships are weird, even ones that we end up loving like Enchantress and Killer Croc. And of course, this relationship here is no exception. Granted, Rick Flag is more hero than villain, and Harley is currently on the path to being more of a hero in the comics, but I don't think she's quite there yet. And despite her heroic intentions, I think many of us still consider her to be coming from the villain camp. She's trying her best to make amends, but hey, there's a lot of bad things Harley has done in the past, and even some of her methods as a hero, or an anti-hero if you will, are considered questionable. Something else that is questionable? This whole relationship. The one thing it has going for it is that Rick and Harley both seem aware of how bizarre it is and how it can never really work out between them. But still, some of the wording, especially from Flag, feels like weirdly forced. There's dialogue here that I'm like, I don't really know. Also, the two of them together seem to have terrible timing when it comes to getting intimate. See issue number 18 of the 2016 Suicide Squad, part of the Rebirth continuity, to see what I'm talking about.
Coming in at number 4, we have Lex Luthor and the Parasite, although this is a couple that would probably rather forget their brief time together. During a period in Superman's life in which he and Lois Lane were already going through a bit of a rough patch in their marriage, the supervillain Parasite kidnapped Lois and took her place, manipulating her relationship with Clark even further. Part of the Parasite's scheme culminates in him, while appearing as Lois, seducing Lex Luthor into giving the Parasite what he wants, with Lex being none the wiser wiser as to this fake Lois Lane's identity. And while this is pretty yikes from a consent perspective, even for a supervillain, both Lex and the Parasite have since worked together on various supervillain related schemes, so who knows, maybe those two just treat it like an awkward night between flirty friends. Let the record state, I ship these two baldies.
Number 3, Enchantress and Keep. These two are very strange together. Marvel's Enchantress ends up creating Keep in order to battle Thor. As such, being her creation, Keep is also kind of like her son, but then she also gets busy with the Keep, which is a whole weird thing that is really confusing. Adding to the bizarreness of this whole relationship, Keep was actually made from Donald Blake's blood. Enchantress basically tricked Donald into trusting her, fed him a golden apple, cut off his head, and from the blood that spilled forth from his body, Keep was created. After the story where she and Keep fought against and lost to Thor in Hell, as he was dead at the time, we never really see Keep again. So that's that, I guess.
Coming in at number 2, we have the tragic romance of Thanos and death. And no, I'm not just saying Thanos dies a lot, although that has happened a few times. I mean the literal personification of the concept of death. First appearing to Thanos as a child and becoming his only close relationship, Thanos' entire reason for wiping out civilizations isn't to balance the cosmic scales like it was in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but rather as an offering to the only woman he's ever loved. The revelation that this woman is essentially the Grim Reaper is hinted to be the incident that actually drove the Mad Titan mad, and his pursuit of more and more destruction, even as she continues to ignore his advances, means that this romance is just as doomed as it is bizarre.
Number 1, Darkseid and Granny Goodness. Yeah, this is a thing that happened, and although it might maybe make sense on paper, it definitely didn't make sense in the context of this story, at least not from my perspective. In my perspective, the story is pretty nope. But hey, you might like it, and that's okay. This all went down in what I believe is a non-canon 6-issue miniseries following the Female Furies, titled simply Female Furies. Here we learn of all the oppression the Furies suffer on Apokolips because they're women, which based on what we know about the Furies in main continuity doesn't make a lot of sense. Part of the reason why this is definitely not a main continuity story. As some of the fiercest warriors on Apokolips, the Furies themselves are women and are treated as equals. You see, as some of the fiercest warriors on Apokolips in the main continuity, the Furies themselves are women but are still treated as equals. Granny Goodness is also presented in a different light, and it is heavily implied that she is forced into a sexual relationship with Darkseid in order to maintain her position of power. Yeah, that's a thing that happens. Even then, she and the other women warriors are constantly undermined by the men. As I said, it's not in continuity or canon, at least I really hope it isn't. But even then, it still feels like it's reaching, even if it was non-canon. And we don't need a consensual, let alone a non-consensual relationship between these two in any continuity, I think. Are you with me or are you against me? Let me know in the comments.